seminars. This will be dedicated to sorry, I think I might have to restart. We're starting our next seminar in our Overcoming the Past series, dedicated to how the past and history affect our present. Today, we will be talking about the influence of the discourse of the past on the present, the use of the past in the discussion of the war between Russia and Ukraine, the use of the discursive practices by Russia with regard to Ukraine, and our speaker today, our guest today, is a renowned German historian. Sorry, I wish to introduce to you Kai Struve. He is a doctor, Ph.D. In history, a lecturer in the Martin Luther University in Halle. He earned his Ph.D. in the Freie University in Berlin in 2002. He had worked in the Government Institute in Marburg and the Institute for Jewish History and Culture in Leipzig. He was also a guest researcher in France, Poland, the United States, and other countries. His academic interests include the history of Poland and Ukraine in the 19th and 20th century. Recently, Duch i Litera, the Ukrainian publisher, published the Ukrainian translation of his fundamental work on the German authorities, Ukrainian nationalism, and violence against the Jews in the summer of 1941 in Western Ukraine. It is this work that we will try to focus on today in talking to Dr. Struve, and we will also start traditionally with perhaps more general questions on how the discourse of the past affects our present day, how it is used in various practices, what should historians do with this in these very difficult conditions, this difficult time. And my first question to Dr. Struve will have to do with specifically the title of our rubric. They're called Overcoming the Past. And so just the meaning of this, what is this? What do we mean by this? And should we even use this concept anymore? Because obviously this is mostly a translation from the German, of that German concept of Vergangenheitsbewältigung, which is used in the culture of memory and the policy of memory. What meaning might we put into it? And is it still relevant for us today to use the concept of overcoming the past?
Так, на початку я хочу дуже вам дякувати за...
First of all, I wanted to thank you for inviting me. Fortunately, my Ukrainian is less, it's not as good for me to be able to converse in Ukrainian, and so I will now switch to English.
I will switch now to English, and I would like to thank you again for the inviting me to this seminar, despite the war and this difficult situation and circumstances that currently exist in Ukraine. And I would like also to express my admiration for the courageous resistance of the Ukrainian society and the Ukrainian armed forces against this appalling Russian attack. Yes, regarding your question on the meaning of the term overcoming the past, there are at least, I believe, at least two different ways how to understand it, and I think this term originates from the German term Vergangenheitsbewältigung, that was rather popular in this period from the 1950s to the 1980s, and described basically a process of confronting the mass crimes of the National Socialist regime in the German society, of getting to know about it and discussing it. But since then, in recent decades, this term is rather rarely used anymore, because in a sense it means, at least in the German language, that is a process with an end. Basically, it says the German society has to confront and learn about the crimes of the past, but then it will be done, and I'm somewhat exaggerating, we can forget about it. And this was not a conclusion that, as many believed, should be drawn, but the mass crimes of the past, especially the Holocaust, should become a permanent reminder for defending a democratic and tolerant society. A different meaning, I think, says now in the Ukrainian context proposed by Jaroslav Rycak in his book with this title, and that, if I understood that correctly, means that rather, in a sense, the sense here is rather that the Ukraine should free itself from structures of the past that inhibited and still inhibit, in a way, developments, a positive development of Ukraine in the decades since independence. And that Rycak also argues that understanding and reflecting on history has an important role in this. I think that in a way it seems to be possible to give this term now, in the context of the current war, also a third meaning, that this term of overcoming the past. Obviously, in a strong way, this Russian war is closely related to ideas and also traumas of the past, imperial ideas, but probably more importantly, also a lack of a really substantial reckoning with the Soviet mass crimes and the fundamental evil character of the Soviet regime in Russian society. So in a way, also Ukrainian victory in this war could be an important contribution to overcoming of the past.
Дуже дякую за цю відповідь.
Thank you very much for this answer and for this tying it into the current context of how overcoming the past might play into the current war. And truly, in the first part of our questions, we often discuss this role of the war, of the Russian-Ukrainian war, and of the past and its interpretation. Part of historians still believe that Ukraine is still, and we can see this, that Ukraine is still a hostage of its historically disadvantageous status of the borderland of European civilizations, this kind of buffer zone, collision zone with Russia. How should we rethink the past considering this borderland situation? And what might historians do in this situation in conditions of Russian aggression now?
I believe that the current war raises a lot of questions, new questions for historians, or maybe puts into question also a lot of things that had been done, written and believed in the past. I think that for the most part, this is not a question for Ukrainian historians, but rather more for Western historians, and also for the Western and the international public. And it's obviously it's also a fundamental question for Russian historians. But that is a problem I won't address now. But among Western historians, probably most strongly in North America, but also in Germany, in recent months, a new debate has begun about problems of a Russia-centered perception of the whole region of Eastern Europe and the former Soviet Union in Western and international scholarship. And that this has also resulted in ignorance about other national histories, about other linguistic cultures, and other non-Russian experiences. And then there's a lot of currently there's a lot of discussion about decolonization of not only of Russia but also of the scholarship about this region, including history. In any case, I believe that the consequence of the current war will clearly be more critical attention and critical questions towards Russia and also the Soviet Union as empires, and also to experiences, perspectives, and voices of the non-Russian nations. But also, and I believe that also in Germany and also in other Western countries, we need to pay more attention to the Soviet regime and its mass crimes. That is not so much a question of historical research that exists, maybe with some deficits, but it's not so bad. But it's rather a question of public awareness and public cultures of remembrance.
Дякую. Так.
Thank you. Yes, thank you for raising this important point of decolonization of even academic studies, because really this discussion is there among Western historians, and Ukrainian diaspora historians are also very involved in it. And we have actually a cycle of materials planned for December for this discussion, particularly the participation of 2 diaspora historians. Before I ask the next question, I would like to remind our listeners that we are in our Overcoming the Past seminar with renowned German historian Kai Struve, and we are talking about the influence of Russia's current war against Ukraine on the discussion in the historical field. You will have the opportunity to put questions after we finish the interview format, the questions and answer format. As of today, the so-called the shadow of the Second World War plays an important role. On the one hand, Russia uses a lot of beliefs and myths of the Second World War in its anti-Ukrainian propaganda. On the other hand, in Ukraine too, there is a tendency to use the conceptual apparatus of the Second World War to mark the aggressor, calling them fascists. The concept of Russism itself, Russism, which can be seen as originating from fascism. In your opinion, will today's war change our ideas of the Second World War in general? And how productive is the use of this rhetoric from the Second World War in the discourse of the present war?
Yes, I think that are several and complex, but also important questions. And I think that are questions that will us keep busy in a way for the coming years, maybe the next decades. And I think I will start with the attempt to answer the question with which you finished, because that is probably the most fundamental one. In Germany and also in the Western international public, the Holocaust and German mass crimes during World War II have been in the center of the view of the 20th century history, and in a way are considered to be as the German philosopher Jürgen Habermas put it about 30 to 40 years ago, be the negative signature of the century, or in a way the negative emblem of the 20th century's history. And Soviet mass crimes in these discourses have not had very much attention. I think that there is, when you observe the German or more the European and the Western European and also the West discussions in the international Western public, there is already a change, has been already a change in this for the at least about the last 10 to 15 years. That means there has been also a slow increase, mostly as the result of the influence or activities from Eastern European countries, including Ukraine, also an increasing influence for the Soviet mass crimes. But I believe that now, as a result of Russia's war against Ukraine, this will strongly accelerate. I think still this week, for example, the German Bundestag will adopt a resolution that calls for remembering also Soviet crimes. It will also refer to the Holodomor and probably also call the Holodomor a genocide. But it will also, at least what I've seen there in a newspaper report, emphasize that Soviet mass crimes are a part of our common European history, and this should be remembered also here in this context. And at the same time, in Eastern Europe, the history of the Holocaust attracted increasing public attention only, basically, or for the most part, was it possible only since the 1990s. And in Ukraine, you can see this raising public awareness and attention to the Holocaust as a process, basically also for the last 15 years or so. And I believe that also this will continue and should continue, because Ukraine, Poland, Belarus, Lithuania, that are the countries where the actual mass murder of the large majority of European Jews took place, and where also the large majority of the murdered Jews came from and had lived before the Second World War, and therefore the Holocaust had also the deepest impact on these parts of Europe.
Дякую, спасибі за
Thank you for this emergence to the themes of the Holocaust, which of course touches upon your specific research. And before we switch to the discussion of these problems that have to do with your studies, perhaps just another quick question. In our difficult times, how might historians behave? How might they discuss these questions of the history of the Holocaust, which often bring various difficult aspects of collaboration or the participation of the local population in the Holocaust? And perhaps it can even play into the Russian propaganda, because we often hear these accusations. How might we discuss today this subject so as to take into account the context of the Russian-Ukrainian war, and so as not to do harm, but at the same time so as not to avoid this objectivity and this necessary discussion?
Yes, this accusation of Ukrainian Nazis, and what Putin said, the denazification of Ukraine, yes, as one of the current war aims, is is I think that is the background for your question, and but that is not a new invention of Putin now, but it's only the last expression of this Soviet, I would say it's a Soviet enemy image of Ukrainian nationalism, the identification of all forms of Ukrainian nationalism that were anti-Soviet as a form of fascism. I think the task for historians here is also the analysis of this enemy image, and this enemy image apparently continues to have an important impact in Russia. I think it's one can even argue that it had an impact on the decision on Putin's decision for the war, because this decision clearly were based on very wrong ideas about Ukraine and Ukrainian society, among others that Ukrainian nationalism, in a way, Ukrainian strivings for independence and separate identity from Russia had not a very deep roots in Ukrainian society, and that are all parts of this traditional Russian and more strongly Soviet enemy image. This is a problem the Ukrainian society, I think, has struggled with already since the 1990s, in a way, because this was the strong conflict about history that, as far as I see it, you will know that better than me, that existed in Ukrainian society from the 1990s onwards. The conflict between a rather national account of history and an account of history that was strongly influenced by Soviet elements. And the one element of this Soviet enemy image consisted of an identification of all forms of Ukrainian or collaboration in Ukraine, collaboration with the Germans during the German occupation in World War II. As something that is related to Ukrainian nationalism, and that blurred also the differences between different Ukrainian actors. It denied basically that this cooperation between the Bandera group, the Bandera OUN, and the Germans broke down to a large degree also in the second half of 1941, so that's I don't think that this creates a problem for discussing the problems of collaboration, but rather, and I think one can see that already since 2014, it maybe opens up the possibilities for more serious discussions of this, because it's clear now that this Soviet enemy image, the Soviet instrumentalization, is nothing that is serious, but is manipulation and falsification. And nevertheless, there clearly was collaboration. There clearly were large crimes also of the nationalists, and I think there is now maybe a better possibility to discuss this than it had been when it was also in Ukraine such a strongly contested issue.
Thank you. Yes, our seminars are actually there with the goal to discuss these problematic points, perhaps carefully but openly and frankly discuss these difficult subjects. So to do things that cannot be done in Russia, for instance, in a society where we can see what a lack of open discussion leads to, some sort of a new form of either, I don't know, some sort of neo-fascism or some sort of nostalgia. But discussion is inherent in the democratic society, and this is why it's very important to discuss also difficult topics. And one such topic is, of course, treated in your fundamental study on the Jewish pogroms of the summer of 1941. This study deals with a topic that in Ukraine brings forth very serious discussions. There are debates about how these pogroms went, who initiated them, who participated in them, etc. According to the conclusions in your study, most of the pogroms were not chaotic; they were organized. And who specifically is responsible for the organization of these pogroms in East Galicia? If we switch to the discussion of your work specifically, that again, I will remind, it's called German Authorities, Ukrainian Nationalism, Violence Against Jews, published recently, several months ago, by Duhi Litera in Ukrainian translation.
Yes, thank you very much for paying attention to my research here. I'm in my study. I prefer the more neutral term of anti-Jewish violence or violence against Jews. I think the argument in the book is that when we understand the term pogrom as describing mostly spontaneous violence in the sense of public riots, a large part of the violence that took place from the side or with the participation of the local population cannot really be called pogrom. The image that exists about this anti-Jewish violence in summer 1941 is very strongly influenced by the events in Lviv on the 1st of July 1941. The reason for this is that there exists a lot of reports about it, testimonies of Jews and also other documents, but that is one of the events where we also have a rather large number of photos and also some film documents. And I think that is a reason why this the public imagination or the image of these events in summer 1941 is so strongly influenced by the events in Lviv. And the events in Lviv were not, the events in other places were not always the same as in Lviv, especially in smaller localities. You have some places, localities that was rather similar to Lviv, for example, pogrom violence in Borislav and Zambia. And I believe that the term pogrom can be used for these places where this public riots occurred and public spectacles occurred. But there is a lot of violence that in villages and smaller localities where there were no such riots, but the killings were rather targeting murders, executions in a way, often in the form of executions of pre-selected people who were considered by the perpetrators as supporters of Soviet rule. In these murders, these killings did not only include Jews, but in some cases, rather many cases, also Ukrainians who were considered traitors or supporters of Soviet rule, and also Poles were killed. But in contrast to Jews, in these cases, very rarely whole families were killed. In the cases of Jews, often families were killed, and this sometimes, and also in Jewish memoirs and testimonies, created the impression that it were pogroms. But when you look more closely at these events, then you see that they killed certain families, or certain individuals. It often took place very often took place during nights, not in public spectacles during the days. Or in some places, you have also kind of executions. So 10 people or so were arrested, led out of the cities, and shot, or killed in other ways. And the perpetrators were insurgent groups, local militias that had been established by the OUN, the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists. And these killings, these targeted planned killings, were part of the change of rule from Soviet to German, or from Soviet to Ukrainian, part of the taking over of power in certain localities, as also as part of the state building attempt of the OUN in this period.
Дякую.
Thank you. So if pogroms did take place in some instances, they took place, although perhaps not as extensive. What were the motives then? What were the motivations that might have pushed their participants in the instances where the violence did go into a more chaotic, or had the more chaotic nature, more elemental nature?
Yeah. Yes, on the one hand, there's the broader context, a broader motif of a strong identification of Jews with Soviet rule. That is this stereotype, anti-Semitic stereotype of Żydów komuna, as it's called in Polish, but also in Ukrainian, that the Jews were a group that supported and benefited from Soviet rule. And in this period of change from Soviet to German, or from Soviet, as many believed or hoped for at that time, also Ukrainian rule, these were the form of punishment of the Jews for the crimes of the Soviet regime. And that targeted in certain contexts, certain concrete people, but in another way, context took place also forms of a more general attack on Jews. And this public ritual, these public spectacles, is very, as in Lviv, in most cases, took place in those localities where the Soviets had murdered prison inmates before their retreat in the days after the German attack on the 22nd of June 1941. And Lviv is there is a good example. There, the Jews were brought to 3 of the large prisons in the city, where more than 2,000 and 2,500 inmates had been murdered in the week after the 22nd of June. And now the local OUN-led militia brought on German orders Jews as forced laborers to these prisons. The Jews should there retrieve the corpses from the prison cells and from mass graves in the prison yards. And this was the main context of the program in Lviv, and also for example in Borislav or in Zambia. And the Jews were attacked during this in the prisons building, near the prisons buildings, on the streets. And the other element here is that much larger numbers of Jews were brought to the prison buildings as actually were needed for the work or could work there. Several thousand people in Lviv. And this was a kind of also already the work in the prison was a form of punishment, but that beatings and other kinds of attacks on Jews and also killings were a form of a public display of punishment and humiliation of the alleged crimes of Jews during the period of Soviet rule.
Так, дякую. І в розмові
Yes,
ми вже
thank you. And in our conversation, we're now tracing this already a large number of myths that sprang up after in the public space, and how they were written by the historians after the layers of Soviet propaganda. And one such myth was the marking of this that supposedly in Lviv on July 25th, 27th, there was another action of the mass killing of the Jews, which was called the pogroms. And I think the Russian language Wikipedia still has an article calling these the days of the Petlura, the pogroms and the days of the Petlura. What really were the days of the Petlura? You write about this in your study. Could you give us a quick summary of your conclusions of?
Yes, the so-called Petlura days in 25th to 27th of July 1941. The description of these events as a program is not only a thesis of the Russian Wikipedia, but it's something that can be found in many older publications, and is a thesis that was before I could research this in a little bit more in depth, was there broadly accepted that there was similar events. There were similar events like in the beginning of July, also in the end of July. When you look more closely into this, you can see that this was not a pogrom like on 1st of July 1941, but that it in fact was a German mass execution of about 1,500 Jews. And for this, before this German mass execution, the Ukrainian militia arrested the Jews and brought them to the Lonsky prison in Lviv. And from there, the German security police brought them then to the outskirts of the city, where they were shot. And partly this misunderstanding of these events after 25th of July as a pogrom may be related also to the fact that many memoirs of Jews and also some of the earlier research literature did not really clearly distinguish between different episodes of violence also in the first days of July 1941. There was, on the one hand, there was this pogrom mostly on the 1st July, but then there was also a German mass execution on 5th of July. And most Jews in this period were killed during this mass executions. And the arrests for this mass executions of probably up to 2,000 Jews began in the days before. And for many outside observers, also Jews who were not arrested and not obviously also not killed. For many testimonies we have, this they do not clearly distinguish, and many things look very similar between what happened on 1st of July and also on 5th of July. Before 5th of July, Jews were brought to a place, to a sports stadium near the Lonsky prison. They were, also for this mass execution, they were arrested by the Ukrainian militia. As on the 1st of July, where also the Ukrainian militia brought most of the Jews to these prison buildings. But in contrast to this 1st of July, there was not much violence on the streets. And this was also the case before this mass execution of 5th of July. So the events in the end of July are very similar to that what you have in the, not on 1st of July, but during this mass execution on 5th of July, 1941.
Велике дякую. І ви
Thank you very much. And you study mostly the development of this, well, not so much even pogrom, but rather organized actions of mass violence that only seemed like pogroms at times in the territory of Eastern Galicia. However, you also have you draw some parallels with what was happening in Western Volhynia and in the Baltic states. If we focus on these parallels a bit, what was this violence like in West Volhynia and perhaps also in the Baltic states in the earliest days of the war? Were they pogroms, or was it something similar to what was happening in Eastern Galicia, in your opinion?
Yes, I think that the events in all these regions are rather similar. The interesting exemption here is Belarus. In Lithuania, I think the most closest example related comparative to Western Ukraine is Lithuania. But also in Latvia, you have also underground groups that is in cooperation with the Germans begin an insurgency when the German attack on the Soviet Union begins. In Western Ukraine, this is the OUN underground, the Bandera group. And there are similar groups and insurgent groups in the Baltic countries. There is also I think that this is also the core of the pogroms in these Polish regions. That there was also a Polish that in Białystok region that has been discussed intensively in the context of this book by Jan Tomasz Gross, Neighbors, about the pogrom in Jedwabne. And also here in this region, there's a Polish underground that fights the Soviets, that has also some relations with the Germans, not as closely as and well organized as in the Ukrainian and Lithuanian case, but there is some cooperation with the Germans before during the attack on the Soviet Union. And they, as in the other regions, they take over the administration, create militias in the cities and towns that the Soviets had left, and then they start also in a way to punish those whom they identify with Soviet rule. And this can have, in some cases, very grave consequences, as in this town of Jedwabne. There's also encouragement from the Germans for this. And what is the interesting case is that there is only a very small number of places where acts of violence occur in this Belarusian from the Belarusian population in this Belarus territories. And I believe that the reason for this is that there was no strong anti-Soviet underground, no anti-Soviet insurgency in the beginning of the in the days after the German attack of the Soviet Union. And that is, yes, I think that is a core factor, at least for violence, for deadly violence. And that is what you also see in Western Ukraine.
Дякую. І ще таке питання, яке досить...
Thank you. And then an additional question that is pretty clearly traced in your study are the gender and age factors of the violence, dimensions of the violence that took place. When the representatives of the local population sometimes joined, you write about particular gender and age aspects. What was the ratio between men and women among the victims and among the perpetrators of the pogrom violence? And also you write about teenage groups, about teenagers of 12 to 15 years old who sometimes were involved in this violence. And what functions did they play, and why, in your opinion, did this happen? How did it happen in your opinion? Perhaps there are other examples in history when teenage groups would be involved in these pogrom or other violent actions.
Yes, I think that is clear that the large majority of both perpetrators and victims were men in this acts of violence that took place there in the beginning of July 1941. In the places as in Lviv, where pogroms as public spectacles with a lot of spontaneous participation took place, and women were also among perpetrators attacking Jews, but also among victims. And this is, we have, for example, and this is very well known, and there are photographs of female victims of the pogrom. These photographs became a kind of iconic status for some kind of violence, anti-Jewish violence during World War II. This photograph that shows women who were publicly stripped of their clothes as part of a kind of humiliation of Jews. And there are also reports about other forms of sexual violence against women, including rapes. But overall, the number of such reports about, at least about rapes, is very small. And there's no evidence that this was really a mass phenomena during in summer 1941. In contrast to pogroms in other periods and other times, for example, in the period after the First World War. And regarding the question of teenagers, there's not so many evidence, but there's some evidence also for Lviv, and that also in some young people took place in attacks on Jews in this city. And I think that is this. It's only, you can rather only speculate about contexts and motives, but one thing that I think that could play a role here is that these riots, at least in the form that they had in Lviv, had also similarities with pogroms, anti-Jewish riots in previous centuries, some Christian elements in it. And when you look for and analyze, for example, such events in the Middle Ages, you see also one conclusion that you can find in the research literature is that these were the kind of public rituals that took place very often in the Eastern period, in the period around Easter. And there, for example, throwing stones at synagogues or throwing stones at Jewish quarters from the side of the Christian population, and many young people were involved, or primarily young people seem to have been involved in this. It was also a kind of ritual that reminded Jews of the fact that they had a subordinated position in the society, and that they should not dare to cross these limits. And you have clearly also such elements in this, what you see in Lviv, for example, in 1941. Such elements of a public spectacle of punishment of Jews for transgressions of limits, borders, that in the view of the Christian population, Jews committed in the period of Soviet rule. And this was also a public ritual that reminded Jews of their place in society, and should make clear to them that they will have in future only a kind of a subordinated position in society. And that is a kind of ritual where you can see also, as I said, in pogroms in previous centuries, that young people, youth, played an important role in this.
Дуже дякую. Я нагадую нашим...
Thank you very much. I would like to remind our listeners of the seminar that we are nearing the conclusion of this first formal part, and we're now reaching our question and answer, our open questions. You can raise your hand or write your questions, submit your questions in the chat and formulate your questions. I encourage you to put questions, to use this opportunity to put questions. Before we switch to this format, I perhaps will just ask one last spontaneous question. In the beginning, you mentioned, at the beginning of your presentation, you mentioned the discussions that are very relevant now about decolonization of academic studies, of East European studies, including historical studies. Can we do anything in this regard in terms of the history of the Holocaust? Should anything be done here in terms of the study of the Holocaust? Are there problems in that regard? Are any questions raised in that regard with regard to the Holocaust?
Yeah, that's a complex question that would require, I think it's not so much about the question, not a question about studying the Holocaust as such, and about studying the Holocaust in the occupied German occupied territories of Ukraine or the former Soviet Union. But it's more a question of that can be asked to processes of remembrance of the period of World War II and the Holocaust. I would say mostly in Western societies in the period of the Cold War, and also in the decades after the Cold War. And I think that is that are questions and that in this way have not really been raised also in debate among historians or in public debates, and that is the relation between the remembrance of the Holocaust and the remembrance of the Soviet mass crimes in the mostly in the period of the Cold War. And this impact of the Cold War period here has we can feel that until today, I think. This is a complex question. I'm not sure if I will be able to explain that now in short in the right way, but in Western societies, and especially in West Germany, there was on the one hand there was there were controversies and conflicts about the remembrance of the German mass crimes during World War II. And some people who did not like these discussions and who did not want to speak about that, the usual form or an often find form was to refer to the crimes of the Soviet Union and to refer and then we had also in Germany, for example, this Historiker strike in the 1980s, where one of the protagonists, Ernst Nolte, also very strongly put forward that the Soviet mass crimes were more original, as he said, as the German mass crimes, and that was strongly rejected there. So there is an element of the instrumentalization of Soviet mass crimes in an attempt to avoid a critical discussion of German crimes. But a consequence was also that a consequence of the fact that the Holocaust gained more attention was then also that many people did not really want to touch this issue of Soviet mass crimes, because it often could have you could raise some mistrust that you did not want to address the German mass crimes. And there are such, and that clearly was bad, because in some cases such a mistrust was right. In many other cases it was not right, and therefore this became a kind of topic that could have been sidelined in a way in this process. And another element was that the policy of détente in this period, the attempt of finding of disarmament, defining a good some point of discussion of improved relations with the Soviet Union, and clearly there also was not helpful to address these Soviet mass crimes too strongly. I try to explain that now a little bit on the German example, but this is not only a German case. You can see, for example, I think a very strong case is also this relation between the debates of the Holodomor and the Holocaust in the beginning of the 1970s, 1980s, for example, in North America. There you have also such mechanisms. Where on the one hand, there's a tendency not to speak about the problems of the German occupation, problems of collaboration, and instead highlight the Soviet crimes. But in the critique of this, the critique of this was often exaggerated, and there were also serious concerns about remembering also the crimes, the mass crimes of the Soviet regime that then became in a way sidelined in the public. And this is, I think, that is a discussion that we also need to have in the future. So it's important, would be good and important to have I think it becomes now more clear and will clearly become also as a result of this current war more clear that there were two evil, highly criminal regimes in 20th century European history. And that is the German National Socialist regime, but also the Soviet regime. And I think that the Ukraine has to play an important role also in this debate, because Ukraine clearly was the place and the victims of the most grave Soviet mass crimes, but also of the most grave mass crimes of the German National Socialist regime.
Дуже дякую вам за таку глибоку відповідь на це.
Thank you very much for this profound answer to this very difficult question that now brings forth many discussions. Dear colleagues, do we have questions from the room, from the audience?
Thank you so much for a very interesting presentation. As usual, for me, it's funny when such seminars, Ukrainian, Germans always speak in English. It's interesting phenomenon, I think so, of our time. I have maybe a couple questions regarding your presentation, maybe your book as well, because I didn't have any option to join you at the beginning because problems with electricity. So my question would be next. First of all, why do you think such? No, we know this narrative, we know this story, we know that own members were involved in these pogroms, etc., etc. These narratives and this story and so on. I think from perspective of facts, or even from methodological perspective, we can almost cannot say anything new. We can find some facts, but okay, it's another question. But I think I'm wondering why such persons like Volodymyr Bemko. Do you know this guy from Bzhizhany? He organized in 1939 committee. By the way, Ukrainian Polish Jewish committee, which tried to stop pogroms, which began on September 1939 in Galicia. Why do you think such type of persons, and he was a lawyer, and before the war and during the war, after he in 1944 he immigrated to Österreich, to Germany, to Austria, and moved to Canada, and he also, like a lawyer, helped to own members and another Ukrainians to survive during German occupation as well. Why do you think such type of personalities unknown in Ukrainian society and in diaspora and in post-Soviet Ukraine as well? It will be, let's say, a factual question. And I have some methodological question to you. Petro had spoken about decolonization in Holocaust studies and in other studies and so on. I'm wondering, what do you think about de-orientalization in Holocaust studies in Ukraine? What I mean this term, first of all, I am wondering how it's possible, how it's possible to look at victims, to Jews, not only to Ashkenazim Jews, to European Jews, let's say white Jews, so-called, yeah? And how it's possible to see small groups like Karaim, like, I don't know, so groups like maybe Kremchats and so on, and also to look at perpetrators, not only like a Christian, Slavic, and so on. For instance, to speak about Tatar involvement in persecution of Jews, and Volga Tatar and Crimea Tatar, and so on. So what do you think about such approaches in Holocaust studies? Thank you.
Yes, I think there is starting with the last question. I think that's a question that should be researched, and probably there is on many questions there is already some research, I think. So that means you are doing some research, as far as I know, on the Karaims, and there have been other researchers who have done such research, and there, I believe, though I'm not really an expert for this, but there is also in some research already on the participation on other, you called it, I think, minority groups like Tatars in it. We have now, I mean, there's a substantial research, though that might be a little bit different case of the members of the German minorities in this in the Holocaust and other crimes of the German regime. Yes, and the first, I did not really get the first question. What the point was here? This, I mean, you have cases where also.
Yeah, my question it was, I want to clarify a little bit. Such cases like Bemko. We don't know, no, we not specialists, like society in Ukraine and diaspora do not speak, do not give names of for streets, such type of person. We do not do it because we do not, why we do not know? Because this guy was not active member of OON during the war and after the war, or from another political perspectives. Why it happened? Why we do not speak about it? I don't know.
Yes, I think that are also questions that are not. I think that are really questions that are not very well researched so far, and at least have not are not often not. There's not a research on that, and there's not any public attention or awareness of in these cases. I mean, you have clearly you have also in this context of summer 1941, you have there are also members of OUN that protected Jews, or cases where people met their friends and tried them from rescue from some things. So there's not I think one conclusion that you can draw from research in these subjects, and also I think that is also something that historians in general encounter in their work, that things are often very ambiguous and diverse, and you have multiple perspectives and multiple experiences also in certain contexts. And I think that is also an important element of what historians should try to achieve, that they make these different perspectives, different voices heard, and include in their work and in their writings. But I'm not sure, maybe you don't look as if you are so content with my answer. And yes,
I do not agree with my question. You know, it's another one. I just want to mention that it's also important to look at from perspective. It's from my perspective to phenomenon of writers among the nations as well, from perspective of multicultural approach, and I would say de-orientalization approach, something like this.
Yeah. Yes, I think that is. I mean, that is important. Is also a complex problem in many respects. I think the research on the rights of nations should be done, and as I understand it, are also currently done in Ukraine. And you have, but that's one point. But you have also to be a little bit careful in this. We have also. For example, in the Polish context now, a critical debate about research into the rights of nations as a kind of strategy of the Polish government or parts of Polish society that does not want to discuss the more problematic issues of the conduct of Polish people and Polish society with regard to the Holocaust during the German occupation. I think some of these accusations against this research may be a little bit exaggerated, but this is also one of the context of debate and also maybe public use of history that have with respect to the questions.
Дякую за запитання.
Thank you for the question, and thank you very much for this discussion which arose during the seminar. I would like to remind other participants that they can also join and formulate their questions in the chat or through raising their hand. Ask to be given the floor and put their questions to our speaker today, the German historian Kai Struve. Colleagues, if there are any more questions, are there any more questions? Perhaps generalizing, has the war affected your studies? Has they affected your research focus or your methodological approach? Has the current Russia-Ukraine war affected your either your focus or your methodological approach?
It clearly has affected my research. I don't know, and it's the one of the there are different ways in which it affects the research, and I was starting in this year. I was thinking about developing a kind of new research project, and that this current war has clearly created large not problems for it, but made it much more complex. This war clearly, and this is related mostly to the point that this war, I believe, will in many respects also change our view and our questions to history, to the history of the 20th century mostly. And so that raises a lot of new and important questions. It is a time of very quick political change, and questions towards history, questions that exist in society towards history are clearly affected also by political changes, and that is also something that happens, I think, currently as a result of this war. For example, I mentioned this planned resolution that probably will adopted during this week by the German Bundestag. I think 1 year ago, it would have been difficult to imagine that such a resolution would have been adopted, and that is shows something about changes in society, changes in public debate, in perspectives, in questions that happened also as a result of this war. Maybe more in the international public than in Ukraine, because many questions that come up here now have been already clear in Ukraine, I think, for many years. But that has also a consequence for which questions historians may address and which are important in the future. That is one point. And the other point is clearly that there were many questions also from the public to me and my colleagues about our suggestions and explanations for things what we see now in this war. So there was also, or was and is also more strong public demand for historical knowledge as it has been in the previous years.
Ми наближаємося поступово до завершення. Колеги, якщо в когось ще є запитання, будь ласка, не вагайтеся. Можете їх задати.
We're gradually reaching the conclusion. Colleagues, please do not hesitate. If you have questions, please don't hesitate to ask them. I remind you that the recordings of, we are recording a Ukrainian and English language version of today's seminar, and these recordings will be put in the YouTube channel of Ukraina Moderna, which we will also inform you of on our official website or in Facebook, on Facebook. Again, to remind you that this Overcoming the Past cycle of seminars is supported by a non-government initiative, Ukrainian Jewish Encounter. And in the near future, already in December, we will be publishing a cycle of materials dedicated to these discussions about colonization and decolonization of historical studies in Western academia. This will include interviews and articles by Andriy Zayernyuk and Serhiy Zhuk, including about the role of the Russian historians in the Russian special services and their operations in North America. So we'll be widening our focus a little bit because this discussion is taking place. And we will be widening the work of our group a little bit. I would like to thank Professor Struve very much for his support in organizing the seminar and help and agreeing to talk on sometimes very controversial and complicated subjects that we will nevertheless continue to discuss because we are fighting for preserving a democratic approach, preserving the young Ukrainian democracy, which is being defended also militarily, but also in these public discussions. If you wish to make some concluding remarks, Dr. Struve, the floor is yours. If you have any concluding remarks to put to us, to conclude our seminar. Thank you.
So, thank you very much for the invitation for this seminar and for organizing these discussions. I think I can express only at the end of the seminar only my wishes that this war will be end soon, that there will be a victory for Ukraine, and that we can meet again under rather normal circumstances and discuss under peaceful conditions.
Я також дякую вам за підтримку.
I also like you very much again for your participation and support. I would like to thank everyone who has managed to join us in this difficult time. And most of the people who registered were probably unable to join us due to the air raid. And unfortunately, the seminar fell right in the air raid, at least in our region, in Rivne, whence we are broadcasting. But we do have a small achievement. We managed to record this. We didn't lose power or connection, and we succeeded in this. And we hope also to see a major victory in the near future. See you soon. Thank you for your attention.